Hey everyone, it's Tony Leonardi, your certified financial planner professional from Newtown, Connecticut, and author of A Smarter Way to Retire. Back with another episode of A Smarter Way to Retire. For the past few episodes, I've been going into detail about my 3-bucket retirement income approach. Last week, we talked about how to invest in each of those 3 buckets. Today, I want to take that concept to the next level, the next logical level, and talk about something just as important as investing, maybe even more important. How you actually withdraw money from those buckets once you're retired. One of the common questions I get from people when they're thinking about retirement is, how do I generate income? How do I turn my retirement savings into an income stream? And that's a great question. I think even a stronger question would be, how do I generate income from my investments in a tax-efficient manner? Because accumulating and building your investments, your buckets, it's only half the battle. The other half is taking money out of your buckets in a way that helps to protect your plan instead of accidentally, potentially damaging it. Let's start with a quick refresher. In the 3-bucket approach, bucket number 1 is called your early retirement income bucket. That's the money that's set aside for the next 3 to 5 years. This bucket is designed specifically for stability and availability. Bucket 2 is your midterm bucket. That's the money that you'll need roughly from years 6 through 20, 25, 30 years from now. This is essentially the money that you'll live on for the rest of your life, the money that will supplement Social Security, pensions, and any other fixed income that you may have coming in. Because this is a mid-term bucket, mid-term time frame, 6 to 30 years, you can take on a bit more growth, a bit more risk in this bucket, but it still needs to be relatively balanced and have the ability to generate some income. Bucket number 3 is your longer-term bucket or your leave-on bucket. It's the money that you hope you'll never spend, the money that you'll never need to live on, and that you intend to perhaps leave on to the next generation. This is where you can take on the most growth-oriented approach that you may be comfortable with because you have a long-term time frame. Once those buckets are built, the question becomes, well, how do I actually spend from them? Where does my income come from? And that's the main concern for most people preparing for retirement or early on in retirement. Where's my income going to come from? In this 3-bucket approach, the basic idea is simple, but most people get it backwards. You want to spend from bucket 1 first. Bucket 1 exists specifically so you don't have to sell stocks or other growth investments during a market downturn, just to help cover your living expenses. When markets are down, you can lean into the cash, the fixed income, the short-term bonds in bucket number 1, letting the growth-oriented investments in buckets 2 and 3 recover. And then you can refill bucket number 1 normally from your midterm bucket number 2, sometimes from bucket number 3 when it's appropriate and the timing is right. This is one of the most practical ways to help reduce sequence of returns risk in the early years of retirement. Remember, sequence of returns risk is the risk that you will experience volatility, negative markets, a downturn in the next 3 to 5 years, which are the most critical years for most retirees. A market downturn in the next 3 to 5 years, while you have to draw money out of your accounts to pay your bills, can possibly start a snowball effect that you can't recover from. Because this is one of the biggest risks most retirees face in retirement, you should have a plan to help offset that risk. So here's my question. Do you have a sequence of returns mitigation plan? Probably not. My retirement income 3-bucket approach could be that plan for you. And here's a practical way many of my clients handle drawing income from my 3-bucket investment approach. Step number 1 is spend from bucket number 1. Simple. This is the foundation of the whole strategy. Bucket number 1 is the money that you've intentionally set aside to cover your living expenses for the next several years so that you don't have to touch your growth assets in case the market corrects or has a downturn. You don't have to touch your longer term investments. In most cases, this is where your regular income will come from and should come from first. So why does this matter so much? Again, because the early years in retirement are the most dangerous in terms of sequence of returns risk. If the market drops 20 to 30% in the first few years and you're forced to sell stocks or growth investments just to pay your bills, you lock in those losses permanently. You also reduce the number of shares that you have that can participate when the market recovers. You start that snowball rolling down the hill, and once it starts to roll, it's very difficult to stop it, to turn it around, and to get it to go back up the hill. So bucket number one is designed to help act as a buffer against that exact problem. When the market's down, you simply spend from bucket one, which are your stable assets that won't be affected by a market downturn. Those assets that you've already set aside just for this purpose. You're not forced to sell growth investments at the worst possible time. Psychologically, this also helps retirees knowing that the next 3 to 5 years of income can reduce the urge to panic and make emotional decisions during a market downturn. That's step number one. Step number two is refill bucket number one when conditions are favorable. Spending from bucket number one is only half the process. The other half is knowing when and how to refill bucket number one. The goal is to keep roughly 3 to 5 years of spending available in bucket number one on an ongoing basis if possible. As you draw money out each year, the bucket naturally gets smaller. At some point, it might be nice to replenish it. Wouldn't you agree? The best time to refill bucket number one is usually after the market has had a strong period, a strong run for a year or two. When bucket number two and sometimes bucket number three have grown, you can move money from those buckets back into bucket number one to top it off. Bring it back up to your target level of 3 to 5 years of income. This is where discipline becomes very important. Many people feel uncomfortable moving money out of growth investments even after a good year or two in the market. They get a little greedy, they want to hang on. Others wait too long and only think about refilling after the market has dropped. The better approach is to be disciplined and have a simple rule or range in mind ahead of time. For example, I might say when my bucket number one gets below 3 years of spending and the market's up for at least a year, I'll take some profits and refill bucket number one, as an example. In practice, most of that refilled money will come from bucket number two because it's the bucket that is your midterm bucket. It's your middle bucket in terms of both time horizon and risk level. Bucket three is usually your long-term, more risky bucket, and it's usually touched more sparingly, especially if a meaningful portion of it is intended to leave on to your heirs for the next generation. Some people might also use a gradual, what I call a slow drip approach to refill bucket number one. Instead of making large transfers once a year if the market's up, they direct the income generated from bucket number two, dividends, bond interest, other distributions. You can direct that straight into bucket number one. This creates a steady automatic refill over time and can reduce the need for those larger, bigger, more deliberate transfers later. Sort of a slow drip or trickle approach. Reminds me of the trickle charger I used to use on my 67 Mustang. Step two is be intentional with bucket number three. Bucket three is typically the last place you want to look for income, the last place you want to tap into to pay your bills. Bucket number three also has the longest term time horizon. In most plans, it also contains a significant amount of leave-on money, dollars that are more likely to be passed on to children or grandchildren than spent during your lifetime. When you take large or frequent withdrawals from bucket number three early in retirement, two things tend to happen. You reduce the long-term potential growth of the money that was meant to compound for many years. And you may be spending leave-on assets that could have been managed much more tax efficiently for the next generation. That doesn't mean you can never touch bucket three. Life happens, as they say. There may be years where larger expenses pop up, where it makes sense from a tax perspective to take some money from this bucket. But the default posture should be protective. The more intentional you are about preserving bucket three, the more flexibility generally you'll have later on in retirement and the better positioned you'll be for legacy planning. With that said, even inside this three bucket framework, tax location remains important. As a general guideline, and again, as always, this is not a one-size-fits-all recommendation. Number one, spend from taxable accounts first when it makes sense. This is why bucket number one is usually filled with taxable accounts. Not always, but often. Two, then you can take from your tax deferred accounts. Traditional IRAs, 401ks generally come from bucket number two. And three, try to preserve your tax-free accounts, Roth IRAs, for as long as possible. This is why you generally use them to fill bucket number three. There are some exceptions, of course. Sometimes it makes sense to take some money from a traditional IRA earlier to manage future RMDs or to fill lower tax brackets. Sometimes Roth conversions fit into the picture. This is exactly why having a good financial model is so valuable. You can test different withdrawal strategies and see the long-term impact on taxes and probability of success. With that said, here are a few mistakes I commonly see. Number one, still treating the whole portfolio as one big bucket, one nest egg. People continue taking a fixed percentage from the entire portfolio each year without considering which money should actually be spent first. Number two, refusing to touch bucket number one because it feels safe. Sometimes retirees become so attached to their cash reserves, they end up selling stocks in a down market instead of using the money in bucket number one that was specifically set aside just for that purpose. Keep in mind, bucket number one is your early retirement income bucket. It's your spending bucket. It's not your emergency fund. There is a difference. Number three, never refilling bucket number one. Some retirees spend down their early retirement safe bucket and never replenish it, which eventually forces them to take income from more volatile investments at the wrong time. With that said, not everyone wants to or needs to refill bucket number one. Depends on your big picture and your circumstances. Number four, ignoring taxes. Taking large withdrawals from tax-deferred accounts without looking at the impact on, let's say, Medicare premiums, IRMA surcharges, Social Security taxation, and future tax brackets could be a big mistake as well. Here's an example. Let's say a couple needs $90,000 a year from their portfolio to supplement their Social Security, cover their bills. They have roughly $450,000 set aside in bucket number one. That's about 5 years worth of spending. In a normal year, they draw down that $90,000 from the bucket. If the market has a strong year, they may move $80,000 to $100,000 from bucket two back into bucket one to top it off. If the market is down, they simply keep spending from bucket one and wait for better conditions before refilling. Remember, you have up to 5 years for the market to recover if you've filled bucket number one properly. This approach gives them more control and reduces the chances that a bad sequence of returns early in retirement will derail their retirement plan. Remember, the 3-bucket strategy only works well when the withdrawal process is intentional. Building the buckets is step number one. Knowing which bucket to spend from and how to refill them is step number two. If you'd like to see how this approach might work with your own financial situation and your own numbers, I'm still offering to build your own smart retirement model at no cost or obligation while time slots remain available. You'll be able to see how different withdrawal strategies affects your probability of success, your taxes, and what you may be able to leave on for the next generation. You can book a quick 15-minute call on my website at leonardifamilywealthcare.com. Just look for my contact and Calendly links. Thanks for listening, and remember, there really is a smarter way to retire. I'll see you next week when we continue this series by stress testing your 3-bucket retirement plan. Have a great week.
Securities and investment advisory services offered through Mosaic Wealth, Inc., member FINRA SIPC. Mosaic Wealth is separately owned, and other entities and/or marketing names, products, or services referenced here are independent of Mosaic Wealth. The opinions expressed herein are for general information only and is not necessarily the opinions of Mosaic Wealth or its representatives. Investing is subject to risk, including loss of principal invested. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. No strategy can assure a profit nor protect against loss. It is not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Please consult your financial professional, attorney, or tax advisor with regard to your individual situation.